Once, when my family of 6 went hiking deep into the woods, we stumbled across something I still think about more often than I should. It was one of those trips that was supposed to be just a normal day out in nature. Just trees, dirt trails, birds chirping, and the kind of quiet you don't get in town. But instead, it became something that planted itself deep in my memory and never really left. It was late spring, the kind of day where the air is cool enough in the shade to wear a light jacket, but in the sun you break a sweat quick. We weren't deep in the wilderness or anything like that, just a trail system about 2 hours away from home. We'd done this kind of thing plenty of times before. My parents always made a point of dragging us out to some park or forest trail when the weather got good. I didn't hate it. Most of the time I actually liked it, especially once we got far enough in that you couldn't hear traffic anymore. Just the wind in the trees and maybe the sound of water running somewhere far off. There were 6 of us, me, my mom and dad, my older sister, and my younger twin brothers. My sister was always halfway irritated on these trips, probably because she'd rather be with her friends or buried in her phone. The twins were 10 and had more energy than sense. My dad was the one who led the charge. He always acted like he knew exactly where he was going, even when he didn't. My mom mostly stayed quiet during the hikes, keeping an eye on the boys and making sure no one got too far ahead. We started on the main trail around mid-morning. The air smelled like damp earth and pine, and the dirt was still soft from the rain that had passed through the night before. There weren't many other people out that day. We only passed one older couple heading the other way, and they didn't say much beyond a quick wave. After about an hour of hiking, we veered off the main path onto a narrower one that looked a little overgrown. Dad said he remembered this one from a few years back and that it looped around to connect with the main trail again. It didn't look too bad, so we followed. The further we went, the quieter everything got. The trees were thicker, and the canopy above let in less light. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring a little if you stop moving. The path twisted around big rocks and wound through steep parts that made the twins huff and whine a little. It took us a good half hour to start feeling like we were really in it, like no one had walked this stretch in a long time. No wrappers on the ground, no boot prints, just thick fallen leaves and sticks breaking under our feet. Then we saw it. It wasn't sudden, not like we turned a corner and there it was. It was more gradual. My sister was ahead of me and stopped in her tracks. I didn't say anything. I just looked where she was looking. A deer, dead, lying in the middle of the path, right where the ground dipped into a shallow hollow between 2 rises. I thought maybe it had been hit by a car and wandered off to die, but there were no roads anywhere close to this part of the woods. It wasn't just the dead deer that was weird, it was how it looked. Someone had carved X's all over its body, dozens of them, thick, deep cuts that ran across its fur, its sides, its legs, even one right across its snout. Not just random gashes either. They were clean. Too clean, like someone took their time with it. The deer's eyes were still open, foggy and glazed. Its body hadn't bloated yet, so it couldn't have been there long. No flies, no smell. Just those clean, deliberate X's carved into every patch of skin. I felt something strange standing there looking at it. Not fear exactly, but a kind of pressure. Like I shouldn't be there. Like I walked into a room I wasn't supposed to see. I didn't say anything out loud, but I remember feeling my throat tighten a little, like the air had thickened up. We all stood there for a minute, just silent. No one moved. Eventually, Dad stepped forward and went around it on the side, leading us to keep going. I think he just didn't want to scare anyone, but it was too late for that. I could tell we all saw the same thing and all of us were thinking it without saying it. This wasn't an animal kill. This wasn't coyotes or a bear. This was a person. Someone out here did that. We kept walking, but no one said a word for a long while. The trail was quiet again, but now it felt different. I started noticing things I wouldn't have before. A broken tree limb here, a faint boot print in the dirt there. It might have been nothing, but every little detail stood out more now. I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. Just little quick looks to make sure no one was behind us. Felt like we were being watched. About an hour later, the trail looped back into the main one, just like Dad had said. I remember stepping back onto the main trail and feeling this weird sense of relief wash over me. like I'd been holding my breath without knowing it. There were still no other hikers in sight, but something about being back on the familiar path made it feel safer. We didn't stop for lunch like we usually did. Nobody said anything, but we all kind of agreed without agreeing we wanted to be done. So we just kept walking until we got back to the car. The ride home was quiet too. No music, no usual chatter from the back seats. My brothers even stayed quiet, which never happened. Everyone was just tired, or at least that's what we told ourselves. That night, I kept thinking about the deer, the way it looked, those cuts. I tried to reason it out. Maybe some deranged hunter, maybe some messed up group of teenagers playing around. But none of those explanations really made it feel better. It didn't feel like a joke. It didn't feel random. It felt intentional, like someone was sending a message, even if we didn't understand what it was. I started looking online for anything similar. Reports of animal mutilations in that area, cult stuff, even some darker corners of the web. I found a few stories here and there about people finding deer or raccoons or even dogs carved up like that. Sometimes with symbols, sometimes with parts missing. Most of it was brushed off as weirdos or sick kids. No arrests, no real explanations. I never told anyone I did that research. It felt like digging too deep into something I was better off forgetting. But I couldn't shake it. I still can't. That image of the deer lying still with those perfect X's across its body never left me. I even dreamt about it a few times. In the dreams, it wasn't a deer. Sometimes it was something else. Person, family pet. Once it was me, lying there with those marks all over me and eyes wide open. We never hiked that trail again. Not that one, not even that park. Years passed, and it slowly faded into the background of our lives. Life moved on. We went on other trips, did other things. But that one day stayed like a splinter in the back of my brain. Every now and then, something would bring it back. A smell, a photo, or just a quiet moment when my thoughts wandered too far. I think the scariest part of it all was that we never found out who did it. There was no follow-up, no news article, no one ever caught or even suspected. It was just something we saw, and then we walked away. But someone had been there. Someone took the time to carve up that deer like that. And if we'd come by maybe an hour earlier, maybe we'd have seen them. Or maybe they'd have seen us. We never talked about it much as a family. It was like a quiet agreement to just let it go. But I can tell it stayed with all of us. You could see it in the way we acted on future hikes. Sticking closer together. Checking behind us more often. Carrying more than just water and trail mix. We were changed by that day even if nothing else happened. And that's the part that still gets me. Nothing else happened. There was no final twist. No big confrontation. No missing people or creepy guy in the woods. Just that deer and those X's. But it was enough. Sometimes the scariest things aren't what happens after, but what doesn't. What's left behind. What you can't explain. And who might be watching just beyond the trees. I've always loved hiking alone. There's something about being out in the woods with nothing but a pack on your back, boots on the ground, and the sounds of nature around you that just makes the world feel right. No traffic, no phone signal, no emails. Just trees, wind, and the trail. Last fall, I planned a solo hiking trip up north in the Appalachians. Not far from the Tennessee-North Carolina border. I'd gone a few times before, but this time I wanted to hit a section of trail that veered deeper into more remote woods. I'd mapped it out, left my itinerary with a buddy, and packed carefully. A couple days of steady hiking, then loop back around. The first 2 days were calm. Weather was cool, skies were clear. Not many bugs, and the trail was soft from past rain but not muddy. I passed a few other hikers on the first day, just enough to exchange polite nods and keep moving. By the end of the second day, I'd pushed far enough that I stopped seeing anyone. That was what I'd wanted. Silence and peace. My third morning out, I was a few hours into the day when something felt off. It wasn't anything big at first, just the sense that the woods had quieted down more than usual. No birds, no wind, no rustling. Just me and my footsteps. I just rounded a bend in the trail when I saw it. Something off to the right, maybe 30 feet into the trees. At first, I thought it was a tree stump or a log standing upright. I slowed down, squinting. Whatever it wasn't moving, but it wasn't shaped right. Too narrow. The top looked wrong, like a lump instead of branches or bark. I took a step off the trail to get a better look, then stopped. It moved, just a little, enough to tell me it wasn't a log. I backed up a step. It wasn't big, maybe 5 feet tall, maybe a bit more. I thought maybe a bear. I knew black bears were in the area, and I'd seen 1 or 2 from a distance before. But something about the shape was wrong. The limbs were too long, the stance too upright. It wasn't standing like a bear on all fours. It was standing like a person. Then it turned slightly, just enough for me to see the side of it. It didn't have much fur on it. Patches of raw-looking skin showed through what looked like thin, scraggly hair. I recognized it then. Mange. I'd read about it. Bears with mange lose most of their fur. Their skin gets inflamed, infected. They look sickly. But the worst part is, when they stand up with those long limbs and bald skin, they don't look like bears anymore. They look human. I'd seen online posts about humanoid creatures deep in the woods. People who swear they saw something that wasn't quite animal, wasn't quite human. I used to think it was just stories. But standing there, I knew exactly what they'd seen. I stayed frozen. I didn't want to move too fast, didn't want to spook it. It hadn't made any noise, and it wasn't looking right at me. Its eyes were half shut, like it was squinting or tired, turned its head back away and just stood there again. After maybe 30 seconds, felt like a lot longer, it slowly turned and started walking away into the brush, upright, just slowly walking. No rush, like it was half asleep or sick. I didn't move until I couldn't see it anymore, and even then, I stayed still for another couple minutes, listening. I didn't hear a single branch snap after it left. I got back on the trail and kept walking. I didn't run, but I picked up my pace. Heart was pounding. I didn't see anything else the rest of that day, but I couldn't get the image out of my head. That sickly, human-shaped thing in the trees. I camped that night farther off the trail than usual, hoping to feel safer. I didn't light a fire, just ate a protein bar cold and lay in my tent in the dark. The woods stayed quiet all night. No movement, no sounds, just silence. Next day, I kept hiking, making my way toward the loop that would take me back toward the trailhead. I was maybe 15 miles from where I'd started. I figured I could knock most of that out in a day and a half. Around midday, I came to a spot where the trail curved near a small stream. It was the only place to refill water for miles, so I stopped and walked down to the water's edge. That's when I saw the tracks. Just a few in the mud, fresh from maybe a few hours earlier. Bigger than a human foot, but not shaped like a boot. Too wide, toes splayed at the front. I've seen bear prints before. These looked similar but stretched, like the skin was sliding or the animal didn't have full control of its step. I backed away from the water, filled my bottle fast, and got out of there. I didn't want to sleep out another night if I didn't have to. By late afternoon, I was already close to the next trail marker. I was exhausted but didn't want to stop. I walked fast, and every few minutes I looked behind me. Nothing there. No sounds, no movement. But the silence never really lifted. I didn't hear a single bird all day. That night, I found a flat spot near a rock outcrop and set up my tent. I kept the fly off so I could see the sky. The stars were out, moon almost full. I told myself I was fine. It was just a sick bear. But deep down I knew I'd never seen anything move like that before. Around 2 a.m., I woke up. I didn't hear anything, didn't know why I was awake. Just opened my eyes and felt alert. The woods were still dead quiet. I looked up through the mesh of my tent. Stars were gone. Cloud cover had moved in. Then I heard a sound, soft, like breathing. Not close, but not far. I sat up slowly, not making a sound, listening hard. There it was again. A low, slow inhale, then an exhale, like something heavy, tired. It came from the trees behind my tent, maybe 20 feet away. I didn't move. I sat frozen, staring into the dark. After maybe a minute, the sound stopped. I don't know if it left, or if it just stood still and quiet. I lay back down eventually, never closing my eyes again until morning. When the sky lightened, I packed fast. Didn't eat, didn't even stretch. Just threw my gear into my pack and got moving. I made the last few miles by noon. When I reached my car, I didn't feel relief. Just a dull sense of something unfinished. Like I'd seen something I wasn't meant to, and it had seen me too. Over the next few weeks, I kept thinking back to it. I started reading old reports online, people talking about wild men, ape-like creatures, or forest things. Most of them described something tall, thin, walking upright with patchy skin or long limbs. People said it couldn't be a bear because it looked too human. But I knew better. I knew exactly what they saw. It was a bear. Just a bear, sick and mangy, too far gone to look like one anymore. Starving, lost, maybe even going blind. But not a monster, not a ghost, just an animal in pain. That was the scariest part. Because out there in the woods, you expect nature to follow rules. You expect to hear birds, see deer, feel the wind. You expect the animals to look like animals. But when those rules break, when the things you thought you understood change shape and stand upright and stare back at you, there's nothing comforting about that. There's no storybook ending. I've been back on the trail since then, but I stay closer to more traveled paths now. I still think about that bear or whatever it was. Sometimes I wonder if it made it through the winter, but part of me hopes it didn't, because whatever I saw that day, whatever stood there in the trees watching me, it wasn't just sick. It wasn't just lost. It had looked like it had forgotten how to be an animal. And when something forgets what it is, there's no telling what it might become. I was on a solo hike in the mountains. The air was crisp and cool, just the way I liked it, the kind of weather where you could feel the chill against your skin, but it wasn't unbearable. I'd been walking for hours, my boots crunching on the dry dirt and dead leaves scattered along the trail. The forest was quiet, except for the occasional rustle in the trees and the distant calls of birds. No one else was out here, just me and the wild. I liked that. I'd been hiking for a few days now, a trip I'd planned to get away from everything. No distractions, no city noise, just solitude, a break from the usual grind of life. But I had to admit, even though I'd been out here for a while, there were moments when the silence felt too quiet. There were spots where the wind didn't move the trees, where the usual hum of the forest seemed to pause for a beat. It was eerie, but I chalked it up to my overactive imagination. After all, I'd heard plenty of stories from people who came out here and talked about strange noises or animals that looked a little off. Some of them swore up and down they'd encountered skinwalkers, creatures that were half human, half animal, capable of walking on two legs. They said these creatures could mimic human sounds, and that they'd been seen out here in these mountains, especially at night. Yeah, I knew the stories. Everyone had heard them, but I wasn't one to believe in ghost stories or superstitions. Most of the time, I figured these were just wild imaginations running off the edge, fueled by fear and isolation. People were known to jump to conclusions, especially when they were tired or hungry or lost in the middle of nowhere. But that day, something happened that made me question my own judgment. It was mid-afternoon, and the sun was hanging lower in the sky. The trail I was following wound through dense trees, where the canopy blocked out most of the light. I slowed my pace as I approached a clearing. It was a wide-open area, but something felt wrong. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I stopped, taking in my surroundings. There was no wind, no sound, just silence. And then I saw it. At the far end of the clearing, just at the edge of the trees, was something that made my heart skip a beat. It was a figure standing on two legs, completely still. At first, I thought it was a person, maybe another hiker who had wandered off the trail. But as I stared, I realized that it didn't quite look right. The shape was hunched over, like it was slightly crouched, its shoulders broad and oddly shaped. The skin looked wrong too, as though it had patches missing. The fur, or what I thought was fur, was sparse, almost patchy in places. It looked sick, like it had been diseased for a long time. Its face was hidden in shadow, but its outline was unmistakable. A hulking creature that was far too large to be a person. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't sure what I was looking at, but I knew instinctively that it wasn't normal. It was wrong. I felt a chill seep into my bones, and for a moment, I just stood there, frozen. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing, trying to make sense of it. Was it a bear? It was too tall to be a bear, though. A bear walking on its hind legs? That didn't make sense. I'd heard stories, of course, of bears with mange, and I remembered some people talking about the way a bear's face could appear, human-like when it had lost its fur. But even then, what I was looking at didn't quite fit the description. This thing didn't seem to be an animal at all, and it certainly didn't look like a person either. I took a step back, slowly trying to stay calm. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, but I couldn't. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure standing motionless in the trees. Was it watching me? Couldn't tell. I couldn't make out enough of its face to be sure. A sound broke the stillness. It was a low, guttural noise, almost like a growl, but not quite. My stomach churned. Whatever it was real. It wasn't just some hallucination or trick of the light. I'd seen it with my own eyes. My heart thudded in my chest as I slowly turned, deciding that it was time to go. I walked away, keeping my eyes trained on the clearing, trying not to panic. I tried to reassure myself. It had to be a bear with mange, that was all. But deep down, something told me that wasn't the whole story. I wasn't sure why it felt so different from just a bear or some animal in the woods, but the more I thought about it, the more I felt that it wasn't just a wild animal. It felt deliberate, like it knew I was there. I picked up my pace, moving quickly but quietly. I didn't want to risk making any noise and drawing its attention. Every snap of a twig underfoot felt too loud in the quiet of the forest. I didn't know what the hell that thing was, but I had no intention of finding out. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. I didn't see anything else, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept expecting to hear something moving behind me, but there was nothing. It wasn't until nightfall, when I set up camp, that I started to hear strange sounds. Not the usual noises of the forest, no crickets, no owls. Instead, I heard a slow, dragging sound, like something heavy moving through the underbrush. It came from the direction of the clearing, and I couldn't shake the image of that thing standing in the trees. I was awake most of the night, listening, trying to tell myself that it was just an animal, just the wind, just my mind playing tricks. But the sounds didn't stop. They circled around the camp, coming closer and closer. Every now and then, I'd hear the same low growl from before, and my blood would run cold. By morning, I packed up and got the hell out of there. I didn't stick around to see if it was still out there, and I didn't take the time to double-check the trail I'd come from. I just needed to leave. My heart was pounding as I hurried down the mountain, back towards civilization. As I made my way to the trailhead, I passed a group of hikers who had just arrived. I was careful not to mention anything about what had happened, not wanting to sound crazy. I didn't want to spread panic, especially since I wasn't sure myself what I had seen. But as I walked away, I overheard one of the hikers talking about a bear they had seen, a strange bear with mange. And then it clicked. The stories I'd heard, the ones about skinwalkers and creatures in the forest, they could have just been bears with mange. The human mind, I thought, will sometimes come up with the most irrational things when it's pushed to the edge. The fear of the unknown can make you see things that aren't really there. It was easy to jump to conclusions when you're alone, tired, and deep in the wilderness. But even so, the memory of that creature's shape, its outline, stayed with me. No matter how hard I tried to convince myself it was just a bear, part of me couldn't forget the way it looked, how it seemed to be watching, waiting. I never went back to that trail, and as I left the mountains behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, the stories weren't so far-fetched after all. The sun was setting, the golden light of late afternoon spilling through the trees, as I walked alone down the narrow hiking trail. It was supposed to be a peaceful solo trip, a way to clear my head after a rough few months. I had planned this hike for weeks, picked a route that would get me far enough out in the woods to be alone, but not so far that I would be out of reach if something went wrong. I'd hiked before, plenty of times, so I figured I was prepared for anything. At least I thought I was. The trail had been quiet for the most part. the usual sounds of the forest accompanying me as I trudged along. The crunch of leaves beneath my boots, the soft rustling of branches swaying in the wind, the occasional call of a bird in the distance. It was everything I expected it to be. Peaceful, isolated, a break from the noise of life. But the deeper I went into the woods, the more the quiet started to feel unnatural, almost suffocating. The air seemed heavier, the stillness more pronounced, and I found myself looking over my shoulder more often than I had earlier in the day. I shook it off. It was just the isolation playing tricks on me. I'd stopped for a brief break, taking a swig of water and checking my map when I noticed something off in the distance. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the light as the sun dipped lower. But when I looked again, I saw it, something moving in the underbrush. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a deer, I knew that much. It was too big, too bulky. It looked like it was walking on two legs. I froze. For a split second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe it was just a person, but then I realized no one would be out here this far on their own, especially at this time of day when the light was starting to fade. And it definitely wasn't a person. It was something else. It moved with a strange loping gait, like it was dragging itself forward, the shape of it hunched and unnatural. My first instinct was to turn and head back down the trail, but something held me in place. I didn't want to take my eyes off it. The thing had stopped now, and it was just standing there in the trees, its figure half obscured by the thick underbrush. I could barely make out its shape, but there was no mistaking the height of it. It was tall, way too tall to be a regular animal. Its body looked out of proportion, long and thin, with patches of fur missing from its limbs and torso. It was like something was eating away at it, or like it had been sick for a long time. It didn't look right. I thought maybe it was a bear, but even as I tried to convince myself that it was a bear, I knew it didn't make sense. Bears didn't stand like that. They didn't move like that. And then I remembered something I'd heard before. Stories from people who'd seen bears with mange, the way their fur would fall out in patches, leaving their skin raw and exposed. People had said it looked disturbing, almost like a monster, but I had never seen a bear with mange. I had never seen one act like this, and even if it was a bear, something still felt off. I took a cautious step backward, trying not to make any noise, but I wasn't sure if it had noticed me. The thing stayed where it was, motionless now. I tried to tell myself it was just a bear, nothing to be afraid of. But deep down, I knew I wasn't convinced. There was something in the way it moved or didn't move that felt wrong. It was almost like it was waiting for something, watching, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was aware of me, that it had been watching me for a while, waiting for the right moment to approach. Another rustle in the bushes, and I snapped my head around. It wasn't just the thing I'd seen. There were other sounds now, too, closer this time. I could hear the unmistakable crunch of something heavy moving through the brush, something large and slow. I held my breath, straining to listen, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly where the sound was coming from. It was all around me now, like the woods themselves were closing in. I looked around, feeling the weight of the silence pressing down on me. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if the world had gone still in the strangest way. I didn't know what to do. My feet felt frozen to the ground. Part of me wanted to turn and run, but I was paralyzed. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, an overwhelming sense of danger creeping over me. My mind raced, trying to figure out if I had missed something, if there was a logical explanation for all of this. But there was nothing logical about it. It was then that I heard the growl. It was low at first, almost a whisper through the trees, but it grew louder, more guttural. I could feel it in my chest, vibrating through the air. The sound wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't the usual growl of a bear. It was deeper, more primal, like it was coming from something that shouldn't exist in the forest. Couldn't breathe. My legs felt like they were made of stone, but somehow I managed to force myself to take a step back. That's when I saw it. It emerged from the trees, slowly, deliberately, as though it were savoring the moment. It wasn't just a bear with mange. It was something else entirely. It was taller than any bear I had ever seen, standing on its hind legs like a person, but with long, disjointed arms hanging by its sides. Its fur was patchy, the skin underneath grayish and raw, like it had been through hell. The face, it wasn't a bear's face. It wasn't human either. It had a strange, elongated snout, with sharp, jagged teeth that seemed too long for any creature. The eyes were the worst part. They were pale, almost white, and they were locked onto me, unblinking. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. My feet wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, staring at this thing that had stepped out of the shadows and into the fading light of the day. The thing took a slow, deliberate step toward me, and that's when I snapped out of it. My body finally obeyed. I turned and ran, full speed, my heart pounding in my chest. My legs burned as I pushed myself faster, stumbling over rocks and branches as I tried to put distance between myself and whatever the hell that thing was. I don't know how long I ran. I didn't stop to look back, didn't dare to check if it was still following me. All I could think was to keep moving, keep putting one foot in front of the other until I was out of the woods. My breath was ragged, my mind a blur of adrenaline and panic. The trail seemed endless, the path stretching out before me like it would never end. But eventually, I saw the trees thinning, the trail widening. And then, finally, I broke through the tree line, and there it was, the trailhead, the parking lot, the safety of civilization. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just kept running until I reached my car, and I slammed the door shut behind me. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for the keys, and when I finally started the engine, I didn't look at the woods one more time. That night, I didn't sleep. Couldn't. The images of what I'd seen kept replaying in my mind. The thing in the woods, the way it stood there, waiting, watching. I kept asking myself, was it a bear with mange? Could it have been something else? Something I couldn't explain? I don't know. But I do know one thing for sure. It wasn't just my mind playing tricks. What I saw out there in those woods was real. And I'll never forget the way it looked at me, like it knew exactly who I was and what I was doing there. Maybe some people would call it a bear with mange. Maybe they'd say I was just scared, that my mind filled in the gaps with something terrifying. But if you've never seen a bear with mange, how can that be your first thought? Because I never had. And after that day, I don't know if I'll ever think of the woods the same way again. The fear I felt out there wasn't just the normal fear of the unknown. It was something deeper, something primal. And the worst part? I'm not sure it's over. I'll admit it. I've always found something appealing about hiking alone. There's a certain freedom in it, a kind of peace that only comes when you're in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but trees, rocks, and the sounds of nature. But there's something about hiking at night that doesn't sit right with me. I've always been cautious about it, just doesn't seem safe. And yeah, sure, I'm aware some people are cool with it, but they probably haven't spent enough time thinking about what's out there when the sun goes down. It's not that I'm scared of the dark. I mean, everyone's got their own fears, right? But when you've got predators like cougars, wolves, and bears wandering around, it gets a lot harder to enjoy the serenity of a moonlit trail. I mean, I've heard stories. I've seen the reports. Hell, I've read enough about it to know that hiking in the woods at night isn't a game, it's a calculated risk. One evening, I was up at the cabin, a small, secluded place in the middle of a stretch of dense forest. It was getting late, too late to start a hike, or so I thought. But the air was cool, the sky clear, and something about the silence of the night called to me. I had this sudden urge to go out for a short hike, maybe just an hour or so. But as usual, that urge didn't come with a sense of caution. It was more like a pull, something inside me telling me to get out there. I grabbed my headlamp, checked my pack for the usual essentials: water, snacks, a first aid kit, and stepped out of the cabin. The trail was familiar. I'd hiked it a few times before during the day. It's one of those routes where you feel like you're walking through a tunnel of trees, with the sky barely visible through the thick canopy. In the daylight, it's a beautiful hike, with occasional glimpses of wildlife and the sounds of birds and the wind rustling the leaves. But at night, that's a whole different story. I wasn't thinking about cougars or bears or anything like that when I started. My mind was on the trail, the crunch of the leaves beneath my boots, the way the cool breeze felt on my skin. But as soon as I hit the trail, the quiet of the night wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. It was peaceful, yes, but eerily so. I've always thought of silence as something that calms the mind, but this was unsettling. The air was still, the only sound my footsteps and the occasional rustle of something small scurrying through the underbrush. The trail sloped upward, and I found myself going deeper into the woods. I wasn't worried about getting lost. I knew the area well enough. But still, every step seemed to echo louder than the last, my boots crunching through the dry leaves and twigs. I stopped for a moment to adjust my headlamp. It was bright enough to light up the path ahead, but it felt like I could barely see past the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, but it wasn't enough to make the woods feel less alive. Every shadow seemed to twitch, every crackling branch felt too deliberate. I started walking again, pushing the weird feeling out of my head. It was just the woods. It was just a trail. I kept repeating that to myself like a mantra, but then something happened. It was small, just a twig snap, but I heard it, and I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart skipped, and I tried to rationalize it. Could have been anything. A small animal, a falling branch, the wind, anything. But the longer I stood there, listening to the silence after that snap, the more I realized it wasn't the wind. It wasn't just a small animal either. It wasn't even the rustling of leaves. This sound, this snap, was deliberate. It wasn't natural. I slowly turned my head, scanning the trees and the underbrush around me. I tried to keep my breathing even, to stay calm, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The woods, usually so peaceful and calming, now felt suffocating. Felt like something was out there, something watching, waiting. My eyes flicked to the trees, to the shadows between them, hoping to see nothing, praying that I had imagined it. Another snap, this one closer, a little louder. At that moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was no breeze, no reason for it to be so cold, but it was like the temperature dropped several degrees in a split second. I gripped the strap of my pack, trying to shake off the growing dread creeping up my legs and settling in my stomach. I knew I had to keep moving. The last thing I wanted to do was stand still out here, in the middle of the woods after hearing that. I forced my feet to move, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. I could hear my own heartbeat, thudding loud in my ears. Every step I took felt like it was the wrong one. I knew something was out there, but I didn't know what. I didn't want to know what. The next sound was unmistakable, a low growl, deep, guttural. It didn't come from a small animal. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't a bear. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The growl came from behind me, just out of the reach of my headlamp's beam, and it rumbled through the trees like thunder, echoing off the hills. I couldn't move. My mind was racing, my body locked in place, unable to decide whether to run or stay still. The growl lingered in the air, heavy, as if it was waiting for me to do something, anything. The silence after that was worse than the growl. It was too quiet, too still. I wasn't sure if I was hearing things or if whatever made that sound was getting closer, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around and look. I glanced at the trail ahead of me. I needed to get out of there, fast. With every ounce of strength, I pushed myself into motion. I wasn't thinking anymore. I was just running, moving with nothing but the primal instinct to get away, to get back to safety. My feet pounded against the dirt, my breathing harsh and erratic. I had no idea how far I'd gone, how much farther I'd need to run to get to the cabin. All I knew was that I needed to get there. I wasn't sure what was behind me, but I could feel it. I could feel it getting closer. Then came the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps, not far behind me. They were keeping pace, never faltering, never getting any farther away. My heart skipped again. This wasn't just an animal. It was something that was following me, and it wasn't stopping. I kept pushing myself faster, adrenaline coursing through my veins, but my legs were starting to feel like lead. Every turn of my body felt sluggish, every movement slow. I couldn't keep going like this, not for long. Then I saw it, the light of the cabin in the distance. My heart soared. I was so close. I could do this, just a little farther. But then I heard it, a roar, much louder than anything I had heard before. The sound of it shook the trees around me, rattling my bones. I turned my head, just briefly, to catch a glimpse of whatever had been following me. It was huge, a silhouette, massive, black, with eyes that gleamed with an unnatural intensity. It was a bear, but not like any bear I'd ever seen. Its fur was patchy, almost matted, and its shape seemed wrong. Its body too long, its limbs twisted unnaturally. I didn't need to see more. I turned and sprinted the last few yards to the cabin. My hand fumbled for the door, yanking it open and slamming it shut behind me with a crash. I leaned against it, panting, trying to catch my breath. My eyes darted around the room, every shadow seeming like it could hide something, anything. I stayed there for hours, not daring to look out the window, my heart still pounding. The growling and heavy steps were gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was still out there, watching, waiting. In the end, I didn't sleep. I didn't even want to step outside for the rest of my stay. The next morning, the trail seemed quiet, harmless even. But I knew better. I knew what was out there now, and I couldn't forget the sound of that growl, the shadow of that thing, closing in on me. I don't know what I was expecting when we set out on the hiking trail that day. Maybe a sense of peace or some kind of adventure. But it wasn't long before I realized that the woods had something else in mind for us. It started simple enough, just a family hike. My brother and I, along with our parents, had been out in the woods a few times before, so the trail didn't seem too intimidating. The forest was dense, with the sunlight barely peeking through the thick canopy of trees. The air was fresh, and there was a certain calm to everything. At least that's how it seemed at first. We were a few hours into the hike when we decided to stop for a break. My parents told us to sit down on a fallen log near the trail. The woods around us were silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. It felt like the perfect moment to rest. As we sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the stillness of the forest, or how everything seemed to go quiet the moment we paused. My brother noticed it too. He shifted uncomfortably on the log, casting glances toward the trees around us. I could see it in his face. He wasn't sure if it was his imagination or if he felt something too, but we didn't say anything at first. After all, we were just kids. We didn't want to sound paranoid, and our parents were too busy chatting and taking in the scenery to notice. That's when it happened. I was the first to hear the footsteps. They weren't the soft, rhythmic steps you'd expect from animals in the woods. No, these were deliberate, heavy, and slow, almost as if someone was walking just off the trail, taking their time. The footsteps were too precise, too careful, like they were making sure we heard them. I looked over at my brother, and I saw the same nervous expression I had. He'd heard it too. Without saying a word, we both started scanning the trees, trying to catch a glimpse of whoever or whatever it was. The footsteps stopped. Then, a moment later, they started again, this time a little closer. I could feel my heart rate pick up as I tried to rationalize it. Could be another hiker, right? Or maybe it was just an animal. But something inside me didn't buy it. We stayed still, hoping that whatever it was would pass. But it didn't. The footsteps came closer, too close for comfort. I looked back at my parents. They were still talking, unaware of the tension that was building up around us. I wanted to shout at them to pay attention, to tell them something was wrong. But I didn't. I just sat there, frozen. Then, out of nowhere, we heard a voice. A soft whisper, like someone was trying to call us without actually speaking. It was muffled, but it was there. I couldn't make out the words, but I felt the weight of it press against me. At that moment, my brother stood up abruptly, his eyes wide with fear. He looked toward the trees where the footsteps had been coming from, but there was no one there, just a patch of thick, unbroken forest. I stood up too, and for a moment it felt like time had slowed. The forest around us had become eerily silent, and the whispering voice faded. My parents were still oblivious to what was happening, too lost in their own little world. I didn't know what to do. It wasn't like we could just run down the trail. We'd come so far, and besides, It would have been reckless to just take off into the unknown woods without a plan. My brother grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the edge of the trail. We started walking, slowly at first, our eyes constantly darting to the trees around us. We kept moving, staying close to each other, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It wasn't until we reached a small clearing that things started to feel even stranger. The footprints, those same deliberate steps, had been following us the entire time. I couldn't see them clearly, but there were marks in the dirt, fading just enough to make me question whether I was imagining it. The clearing was empty, except for a small creek trickling through the middle. But then I saw something in the distance, a figure. It was standing still, partially obscured by the trees, watching us. I couldn't make out any details, but I knew it wasn't an animal. The way it stood, motionless, unnerved me. My heart was pounding in my chest as I backed away, trying to keep my eyes on the figure. But my brother, sensing my panic, tugged me toward the trail. We needed to go, and we needed to go now. Just as we turned to leave, we heard the sound again, the footsteps. This time, they were louder, faster, like they were running toward us. We didn't wait around. We bolted down the trail, running as fast as we could. Behind us, I could hear the crunching of leaves and twigs underfoot, getting closer with each passing second. When we finally reached our parents, they were still sitting on the log, completely unaware of what had been happening just behind us. My brother and I didn't say a word. We didn't have to. They could see it on our faces. We were scared, and we weren't going to pretend otherwise. My dad immediately stood up, scanning the area around us. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern creeping into his voice. "We need to go," I said, my voice shaky. "We're not alone." It was then that I realized something. My parents hadn't been testing us. This wasn't some elaborate trick. Whatever was out there wasn't friendly. It was something else entirely. Someone else. The footsteps, the figure in the clearing, and that whispering voice? It wasn't random. It wasn't a coincidence. We didn't talk much on the way back, but every now and then, my dad would glance behind us. I could see the worry in his eyes, too. We weren't sure if it was a stranger or something else lurking in the woods, but we knew one thing for sure. We weren't going back into those woods without a clear plan. We made it back to the parking lot, and my parents didn't waste any time getting us in the car. As we drove away, I glanced out the window, half expecting to see someone following us. But there was nothing. I don't know if we were being watched the whole time, or if it was all just a coincidence. I'll never know for sure. What I do know is that whatever was out there in those woods wasn't friendly, and it wasn't going to let us forget it. My parents never spoke about it, and we didn't bring it up again. But the woods had changed for me. That sense of peace I once had was gone, replaced by the lingering question of whether we'd been targeted by a stranger, or if it was just a test, a strange, twisted game. Either way, I didn't want to find out. Not again. I've been hiking since I was a kid. It's one of those things you just get used to when you grow up in a family that loves the outdoors. My parents, my siblings, and I had been on countless trails over the years. A lot of times it was about the adventure, the peacefulness of the woods, the quiet of being surrounded by nature. But every now and then, the woods felt wrong. It wasn't always easy to explain why, but sometimes the air felt too still or the shadows were just a bit too deep. This one trip, though, this trip changed everything. I'll never forget it. It was a weekend in late spring, the kind of day when the air feels cool but the sun is just strong enough to warm you up as you walk. My parents decided it would be a good idea to take a longer trail through a section of woods we hadn't been on before. It was supposed to be a relatively easy hike, nothing too strenuous. My younger sister, Emily, was with us too. 4 years old, she had just started to get into hiking with the rest of us. She was a curious, energetic little kid, always running ahead and asking a million questions. But she was also small, and I couldn't help but feel a little uneasy when she darted off too far ahead. We started out early that morning. The trailhead was quiet, the only sound coming from the occasional bird call and the distant rustling of leaves. We were in good spirits, laughing and joking as we walked along the winding path. I kept my eyes on Emily as she skipped ahead, her little legs struggling to keep up but never losing her smile. My parents were up ahead, talking amongst themselves, so I stayed near Emily, making sure she didn't wander too far. We came to a fork in the trail after about an hour. One path led down into a valley that promised a good view of the river. The other snaked up toward a rocky outcrop. My dad looked at both options and said, "Let's go up to the rocks. The view's better from up there." So we took the path toward the outcrop. As we climbed, the woods grew denser. The trail was more narrow, the trees closer together. It didn't bother me at first. It was still daylight, and I could see the sky through the canopy above. But the deeper we went, the quieter it got. The birds seemed to stop calling. Even the wind seemed to die down. "Mom, it's too quiet," I said under my breath, not really expecting anyone to hear me. But my mom looked at me from ahead and gave a little smile, as if to reassure me. "It's fine, honey. We're just getting into the denser part of the trail." But something didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just the quiet. It was the stillness in the air. The kind of stillness that felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. Maybe it was just me being paranoid, or maybe it was because I was now the oldest, and part of me felt responsible for keeping an eye on Emily. We pressed on, Emily laughing in front of me as she danced ahead, her voice a soft echo among the trees. I couldn't help but feel a little uneasy every time she ran ahead. But she was so small, so young, so full of life. There was no reason to be scared, right? We made it to the rocky outcrop and stopped for a break. My parents set up a little picnic area on the flat rocks, and Emily was happily running around. I could see the valley below, the river winding its way through the woods, but the view didn't ease the tight feeling in my chest. I kept my eyes on Emily, trying not to seem too overprotective. She was having fun, running back and forth across the rocks, her little giggles echoing in the emptiness. She looked so small up there, so fragile. And then I heard it. It was a voice. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe a bird call. But no, it was a voice, low and distant, just barely audible, like someone was calling out. But there was no one else around. No hikers, no families, no other voices. Just us. My heart skipped a beat. I looked toward my parents, but they didn't seem to hear it. They were too busy unpacking and organizing things for the break. I glanced over at Emily. She was too far away from me, standing near the edge of the rocks. The voice came again, louder this time, but still faint, as if it was coming through a walkie-talkie, garbled and distorted. I froze, my stomach tightening. Who was it? Who was out there? I quickly walked toward Emily, trying to stay calm. "Hey, sweetie, come here," I called out, but my voice felt distant, as if I was calling to her through a thick fog. She didn't hear me, or maybe she just didn't care. She was spinning around, laughing, her voice rising in the stillness. Then the voice came again, but this time it was clearer. It sounded like a man's voice, but I couldn't make out the words. Just a low murmur, like a conversation that had been left too far in the distance. My parents were too far away to notice, but I could see them now. My mom, her back turned, and my dad, pulling something out of his pack. Neither of them seemed to be aware of the sound. My breath quickened. There was something wrong here. I felt it in my gut. I should have said something. I should have told them to stop, to turn around, to go back to the trailhead. But I didn't. Instead, I went after Emily. She was standing on a flat rock, gazing down into the valley. The wind picked up suddenly, sending a chill down my spine. It felt like someone had just walked over my grave. "Emily," I said again, my voice more urgent this time. "Come here, please." She turned, flashing me a smile, but then her eyes flicked to something over my shoulder. Her expression shifted. Her smile faltered, and I saw the first hint of confusion in her eyes. I spun around, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. No one. The woods were still, just as they had been since we arrived. But the voice came again. It was unmistakable now, someone calling out, and it was so close. Too close. I grabbed Emily's hand, pulling her toward me, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Let's go back," I said, my voice tight. "We need to go now." Emily, sensing my urgency, didn't fight me. She clung to my side, and I started walking quickly, trying to keep a clear head, but the voice was louder now, right behind us, echoing in the trees. I turned to look over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following us, but there was nothing, just the deep, dark woods stretching out in every direction. My parents still hadn't noticed. I tugged at my dad's sleeve. "Dad, we need to leave," I said, almost frantic now. "Something's not right." My dad turned, looking at me with confusion. "What are you talking about?" I didn't want to say it, but the words came out anyway. "Someone's out there. They're watching us." My dad looked around, and for the first time, I saw the unease on his face. He grabbed Mom's arm, and they both looked at me, then at each other. My heart pounded in my chest. "Let's go," my dad said, and that was all it took. We turned around and started heading back down the trail as quickly as we could. The air seemed to grow colder with every step, and that voice, that haunting murmur, followed us all the way down. It wasn't until we were back at the trailhead breathing hard that I realized just how scared I had been. My parents were tense too, but they didn't say anything. Not then. We packed up quickly, got in the car, and drove home in silence. I never heard that voice again, and I never saw anyone. But I knew something was out there. I still don't know if it was a stranger or if my parents had somehow heard it over their walkie-talkies. I don't know if we were being watched the entire time, or if I was just being paranoid. But I do know one thing. The woods, for all their beauty and peace, can be dangerous. There are things out there, things that you can't explain. And when you're out there alone, in the quiet, with no one around for miles, it's too easy to forget how quickly things can go wrong. So that day, we learned a lesson. It wasn't the kind of lesson I wanted to learn, but it was one I'll never forget.